I am sure you have heard of this saying from William Shakespeare. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. To this, I would like to add another category. There are some whose true greatness is realized long after their death, and thereafter their fame keeps growing by the day. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, popularly known as Baba Saheb, belongs to this fourth category. I see a striking parallel between Thomas Paine and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Thomas Paine was an Englishman who had the unique distinction of participating in two revolutions, the American War of Independence and the French Revolution. He was one of the founding fathers of the USA, and he also got elected as a member of the Parliament of revolutionary France. And yet, most people have barely heard of the name Thomas Paine. Why is this so? Because Thomas Paine, in 1794, wrote a book called Age of Reason, which was a devastating critique of the Bible and the clergy. And from that time onwards, his name became mud. So much so that when he died, it is said that only 6 people attended this funeral. And it was not until 1952 that his name finally made it to the US Hall of Fame. One US newspaper's obituary read, "He lived long, did some good, did more harm." This remained the verdict of history for more than a century, but then the tide turned, as I said, and today Thomas Paine is regarded as the English Voltaire, a true champion of liberty and defender of the underdogs. Why am I saying all this about Thomas Paine? Because, as I said earlier, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's career bears a striking similarity to that of Thomas Paine. You may have heard of the great American orator called Robert Greene Ingersoll. He paid a memorable tribute to Thomas Paine, which seems almost tailor-made for Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. I'll read out what Ingersoll said of Thomas Paine, and you may treat this as my tribute to Ambedkar. He belonged to the lower classes. He was born in a country where real liberty was unknown, where people hugged their chains, where the privileges of class were guarded with infinite jealousy, and the rights of the individual trampled beneath the feet of priests and nobles, where to advocate justice was treason. He had no veneration for old mistakes, no admiration for ancient lies. He loved the truth for truth's sake and for man's sake. He saw oppression on every hand, injustice everywhere, hypocrisy at the altar, venality on the bench, tyranny on the throne, and with a splendid courage, he espoused the cause of the weak against the strong, of the enslaved many against the titled few. You will agree with me that this tribute fits Baba Saheb perfectly. But in one sense, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was a greater revolutionary than Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine fought against political tyranny, whereas Dr. Ambedkar fought against social tyranny. As Dr. Ambedkar himself put it, a political tyranny is nothing compared to social tyranny. A reformer who defies society is a more courageous man than a politician who defies government. Baba Saheb's revolt against the oppressive features of the Hindu caste system and untouchability, his open declaration that he was born a Hindu but would not die a Hindu, and his conversion to Buddhism along with 5 lakh followers about 3 months before his death made him, in the words of his biographer Dhananjay Keer, the most hated man in India in 1956. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Prime Minister, released a brief condolence message in which he described Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as a very controversial figure in Indian politics. You don't say this in a condolence message, but this is what Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru said in Ambedkar's condolence message. Between 1956 and 1990, there seems to have been a deliberate conspiracy of silence to erase Baba Saheb's name from public memory. School textbooks mentioned his name in passing. Though he wrote very erudite tracts on economics, sociology, political science, and law, college textbooks on these subjects never discussed his ideas. But as in the case of Thomas Paine, the tide turned. From 1990 onwards, Baba Saheb's fame has been resurgent, partly due to the political consolidation of the scheduled castes across the country, partly due to the rise of SC intellectuals, and partly due to an ever-increasing number of books and articles discussing Baba Saheb's ideas. Even the political parties that were strongly opposed to him and his views during his lifetime are now trying to co-opt him into their fold. Economists of both persuasions, on the left and on the right, are trying to cite his writings in support of their respective contentions. Now let me ask you a question. Have you heard of these names? Bhagwan Das, Gobind Balan Pant, D.K. Karve, Dr. B.C. Roy, Purushottam Das Tandon, and P.V. Kane. You may have heard of some of them, or perhaps even all of them. If yes, can you please tell me what they were famous for? I'm not saying that these gentlemen didn't make a significant contribution to India, but their contributions were nothing compared to Baba Saheb's. And yet, Bhagwan Das was awarded Bharat Ratna in 1955, G.B. Pant was awarded in 1957, D.K. Karve in 1958, Dr. B.C. Roy and P.D. Tandon in 1961, and P.V. Kane in 1964. Even Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan of Pakistan was awarded Bharat Ratna in 1987, and our own MGR was awarded Bharat Ratna in 1988. When did Dr. B.R. Ambedkar get his Bharat Ratna? In 1990, 34 years after his death, 3 years after the Pakistani, and 2 years after the movie star turned politician. We remember V.P. Singh for implementing the recommendation of the Mandal Commission and reserving 27% of jobs in the public sector for OBCs in 1990. We should be thankful to V.P. Singh for conferring the Bharat Ratna on Baba Saheb Ambedkar in 1990. Better late than never. We should also be thankful to Sharad Pawar, who as Chief Minister of Maharashtra in 1979 constituted a committee to compile Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's speeches and writings and got them published in 22 volumes, running to thousands of pages through the Education Department of the Government of Maharashtra. Their publication gave a peek into the mind of one of the greatest intellectuals that India has produced. If you have read these works, you will marvel at the sheer breadth and depth of Baba Saheb's scholarship. If Thomas Paine is the English Voltaire, then Baba Saheb is the Indian Voltaire. There was a famous British journalist and author called Beverly Nichols, who wrote a book in 1944 titled Verdict of India. In that book, he describes Baba Saheb Ambedkar as one of the 6 best brains in the world of that time. Let me narrate a personal incident. I belong to the 1983 batch of the I.A.S, and we have a WhatsApp group for our batch. On one occasion, I happened to mention in our WhatsApp group that I consider Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as the greatest Indian thinker and writer of the 20th century, greater than even Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Dr. Radhakrishnan, C. Rajagopalachari, and Aurobindo Ghosh, in terms of intellect, scholarship, originality of thinking, and the range and erudition of his writings. One of my batchmates responded with the message saying, "That's debatable." So I told him, "Okay, let's debate it." I own 17 volumes of Baba Saheb's writings, and I've read large parts of the first 11 volumes. I asked my batchmate how many works of Baba Saheb Ambedkar he had read. He admitted that he had not read any. I told him, "Come on, you haven't read a single work of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and yet you challenge my assertion that Baba Saheb was the greatest intellectual. Isn't this your caste prejudice showing?" Of course, he didn't reply. You may have heard of this English mathematician, G.H. Hardy. He was the guy who spotted Srinivasa Ramanujan's mathematical genius and fostered it by inviting him over to Cambridge. Now, G.H. Hardy was a great cricket enthusiast, and he invented a category called in the Bradman class. As you all know, Donald Bradman was the great Australian Test cricketer whose career batting average was a phenomenal 99.94. Your Sunil Gavaskars, Vivian Richards, Greg Chappell, Sachin Tendulkar, Ricky Ponting, Kumar Sangakkara, Steve Smith, Virat Kohli, all these people, you know what their batting average is? It's only between 50 and 60. Nobody is anywhere close to Don Bradman. So G.H. Hardy coined this classification called in the Bradman class, by which he meant somebody who was head and shoulders above his contemporaries, somebody who was way, way above his contemporaries. I told my batch, the WhatsApp group, that I regard Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as someone in the Bradman class. No one controverted my statement this time. About 3 months ago, a chap called RBSV Manian, I shouldn't be dignifying him by mentioning his name, but this chap was arrested in Chennai for making some very derogatory remarks on Baba Saheb Ambedkar and scheduled castes. Manian said that Ambedkar was not the architect of the Constitution. He was simply a stenotypist. This is what he said. He was simply a stenotypist who took down what the Constituent Assembly debated. Well, Manian was dumb enough to make his caste prejudice public, but I've heard many people express similar sentiments in private. I think there is an insidious attempt to belittle Baba Saheb's contributions as the architect of the Indian Constitution, and this calls for a detailed rebuttal. The Constituent Assembly consisted of 389 members. It is true that the Constituent Assembly was discussed and approved by these members. But the Assembly did not produce the Constitution out of a vacuum. As chairman of the drafting committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's responsibility was to prepare the background note for each article of the Constitution after studying similar provisions in other constitutions around the world, to suggest the draft wording of each article, to lead the discussion about the article in the Constituent Assembly, to reply to the points raised by other members about the article, to redraft the wording of the article in the light of these discussions. Anybody who has read the Constituent Assembly debates would know how pivotal Baba Saheb Ambedkar's role was in the drafting of the Constitution. It should be noted that out of the 389 members of the Constituent Assembly, more than 250 members were lawyers. Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Rajendra Prasad, Rajagopalachari were all lawyers. Why didn't any of them become the chairman of the drafting committee? Besides Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the drafting committee consisted of 6 very eminent lawyers: Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, N. Gopal Swamy Iyengar, K.M. Munshi, Mohammad Sadullah, B.L. Mittar, and D.P. Kaitan. Why wasn't any one of them made the chairman of the drafting committee? The answer is obvious. Everyone from Mahatma Gandhi downwards knew that Baba Saheb Ambedkar was the best man for this job. It is to the eternal credit of Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, and other members of the Constituent Assembly that they set aside their personal differences with Baba Saheb Ambedkar, recognized his true merit, and made him the chairman of the Constituent Drafting Committee of the Constitution. After the Constitution of India was enacted and adopted on November 26, 1949, Dr. Rajendra Prasad gave this handsome compliment to Baba Saheb. I realized, as nobody else could have, with what zeal the members of the drafting committee, and especially the chairman, Dr. Ambedkar, despite his indifferent health, have worked. We never made a decision as right as when we put him on the drafting committee and made him its chairman. Let me repeat. Dr. Rajendra Prasad says, we never made a decision as right as when we put him on the drafting committee and made him its chairman. He has not only justified the selection, but has added luster to the work which he has done. One of the members of the drafting committee, Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, paid this tribute to Dr. Ambedkar. He said, before I conclude, I would be failing in my duty if I do not express my high appreciation of the skill and ability with which my friend, the learned Dr. Ambedkar, has piloted this constitution and his untiring work as chairman of the drafting committee. Another member of the drafting committee, K. Munshi, appreciated Baba Saheb's services as follows. Many know Ambedkar as an embittered champion of the depressed classes, of whom he is one. Only a few have enjoyed his amiability and personal charm, his human friendship and loyalty. An eminent jurist, his contribution to the evolution and drafting of the Constitution was the most constructive aspect of his life. So only a very ignorant and very prejudiced person can say that B.R. Ambedkar was a stenotypist who noted down what the Constituent Assembly debated. The hallmark of a truly great intellectual is that his ideas should stand the test of time. They should not become obsolete or sound absurd in the modern context. This is where Mahatma Gandhi fails and where Baba Saheb Ambedkar succeeds. The Mahatma was a staunch defender of the caste system. He was against big industries. He believed that capitalists and landlords could be persuaded to act as trustees for the poor, the trusteeship theory, as it's called. Baba Saheb's views on each of these issues were exactly the opposite. I would like to elaborate upon one issue where Mahatma Gandhi and Baba Saheb Ambedkar differed strongly. Mahatma Gandhi was a great votary of village panchayats. He envisaged village panchayats as little republics, self-sufficient, and enjoying maximum autonomy. He said that the village panchayat should be the legislature, judiciary, and executive combined, where there would be perfect democracy based upon individual freedom. But Baba Saheb believed that these village republics have been the ruination of India. He famously said, I am surprised that those who condemn provincialism and communalism should come forward as champions of the village. What is the village but a sink of localism, a den of ignorance, narrow-mindedness, and communalism? My personal experience in the I.A.S. has convinced me that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was right and Mahatma Gandhi was wrong. In 1996, you may have read in the papers, the SC president of Melavalu Panchayat, Melavalu village panchayat near Melur in Madurai district, and 5 other SC members were hacked to death in a running bus by caste Hindus. Interestingly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar himself had visited Melur in 1931, and in one of his books he describes this area as notorious for atrocities on the untouchables. Between 1940, you may also have heard of these four notorious villages called Papapatti, Kiripatti, Natharmangalam, and Kottakachi Endil. Between 1996 and 2006, these four village panchayats, in these four village panchayats, the post of president had been reserved for scheduled caste. But the caste Hindus refused to accept that, because the caste Hindus were all landowners and the scheduled castes were largely landless agricultural laborers. They could not stomach the idea of their landless agricultural laborer being the president of the village panchayat. So what did they do? For 10 years, these people didn't allow the elections to be conducted in these four village panchayats. They boycotted the elections and threatened the SCs not to file nominations. Even where one or two brave souls filed the nomination, they threatened them to withdraw the nomination. Or even when one or two times some guy got elected unopposed, he was threatened and made to resign on the same day. Now this charade went on for 10 years, and the National SC/ST Commission came, and the whole case became very notorious. The then Chief Minister, Ms. J. Jayalalitha, sent a team of 4 ministers led by O. Pannirselvam to these 4 villages to persuade the caste Hindus to cooperate and participate in the elections, but they flatly refused. In 2006, the government changed. Kalaignar Karunanidhi became the Chief Minister. I was posted as Secretary Rural Development and Panchayat Raj. And one of our challenges was to somehow conduct the elections to these 4 village panchayats. 17 earlier attempts had failed. We were trying it for the 18th time. Kalaignar Karunanidhi announced in the assembly that an all-party committee headed by M.K. Stalin, who was then the Minister for Rural Development and Local Administration, would visit these 4 village panchayats and persuade the caste Hindus to participate. I thought this was a mistake, so I went up to him and said, "Sir, please don't act upon your announcement, because this was already tried by Jayalalitha, who sent a team of 4 ministers, but they didn't budge. You leave it to the officers. As politicians, you can offer only a carrot. As officers, we can not only offer a carrot, we can also wield the stick. You please leave it to us, and if you fail this time, next time you do whatever you like." So he agreed, and he said, "Okay, I'll leave it to you. Let's see what you can do." So the 2 collectors, the collector of Madurai and the collector of Virudhunagar and myself, we had a war council meeting. We decided how to solve this issue. And if I may quote, it's a slightly vulgar quote from a chap called Charles Colton, who was President Richard Nixon's advisor. Charles Colton used to famously say, "If you catch them by their balls, their hearts and minds will follow." I mean, it's a rather vulgar quote, but it's very true. So we tried to find out what are the weaknesses of these characters, especially the ringleaders in these 4 village panchayats, and systematically neutralized all of them. And for example, just to give one example, we found that one of the wives of 2 of the ringleaders were assistant engineers in Twad board. So we told them, if you make any mischief in this election, your wife will go to Kanyakumari, your wife will go to Ooty. So they said, okay, we are not going to do anything. Finally, the elections were... So like this, systematically, we found out who are the ringleaders, what their weaknesses were, and arm twisted each of them. And finally, the elections were conducted. But we were still worried that because there were the presidents being made to resign immediately after the election on the 1st day, on the 5th day, and things like this. So I suggested to Kalaignar Karunanidhi that we should organize a function in Chennai to felicitate the presidents, vice presidents, and the ward members of these 4 village panchayats, because once they have been felicitated by the CM, they would feel awkward to go back and threaten the SC presidents. So that function was held. Even then we were worried that these fellows will humiliate or ill-treat the SC presidents and make them resign. So I hit upon the idea. I asked the local Tahsildar and the local BDO to attend the village panchayat meetings of these 4 village panchayats as observers for the first 6 months, because I knew that in their presence, these fellows would not dare to humiliate the village panchayat president. So now the problem is completely solved. This was not the only district. Almost in every district there were complaints that the SC village panchayat presidents were treated badly by vice presidents and ward members belonging to the caste Hindus. In some cases, the president would be made to sit on the floor. In some cases, the president would be asked to wait outside. He would be told, we'll discuss, and after the meeting is over, you please come in and sign on the minutes. So when these complaints came to me, so I instructed all the district collectors to have a meeting with the SC panchayat presidents of their district, find out the village panchayats, the names of the village panchayats where there's this kind of a problem, issue a memo to those vice presidents and ward members of the caste Hindus who are doing this kind of mischief, and also tell them that the next time they do this, they'll be booked under the Protection of Civil Rights Act or the Prevention of Atrocities Against SC/ST Act. So the problem got solved. But not fully. You may have heard of the story of Sisyphus from Greek mythology. Sisyphus was punished by the gods, and his job was to roll a big boulder up a hill. No sooner he reaches the top of the hill, the boulder comes rolling back, and Sisyphus had to do it all over again. So dealing with this problem of discrimination against SCs, is like the labors of Sisyphus. As recently as October 2020, there was a news item saying that the lady SC village panchayat president in Kadalur district was made to sit on the floor, while the vice president and other members sat at the table. This is atrocious. The reason why I'm telling all this is that imagine if things are this bad in the 2020s, how they would have been in the 1940s. If things are this bad in a progressive state like Tamil Nadu, how bad they will be in some of the other states. And if the elected SC representatives are treated this badly, how would the ordinary SC would be treated on a day-to-day basis? So Baba Saheb was right and Mahatma Gandhi was wrong. In a deeply caste-ridden society, devolving too many powers and functions, giving executive, legislative, and judicial powers to the village panchayat is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for caste oppression. So Baba Saheb rightly said, democracy is not merely a form of government, it is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards fellow men. The caste system not only fractures national unity, but also makes democracy impossible. Democracy is to be achieved not only in fact, but in form also. Many of us are not aware of the realities, social realities. With us, it is a case of out of sight, out of mind. We really don't know what's happening at the grassroots level. When Sri Pugalendhi and Srimati Subhashini came to invite me, my first question was, why is this function being organized by the Tamil Nadu Income Tax SC and ST Employees Association? Why not by a general association encompassing all employees? This point was already made by Mr. Pugalendhi in his speech. But if you read Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's speeches and writings, you will find that he did not write and work for the emancipation of the scheduled castes alone. He also wrote and worked for the emancipation of workers, women, OBCs, and minorities. He was instrumental in including many provisions in the Constitution to protect the interests of these sections. Therefore, considering Baba Saheb as only a scheduled caste leader would be unfair to his legacy and would be a case of stigmatizing him. Let me give you 3 examples. In 1936, Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar founded the Independent Labour Party to protect the interests of agricultural and industrial workers. As the Labour member on the Viceroy's Executive Council between 1942 and 1946, he played a key role in reducing the number of working hours for labour from 10 hours to 8 hours. Recently, the Tamil Nadu government was trying to increase it to 12 hours. Of course, that's a different story. 2, Baba Saheb's passion for gender equality may be seen from this quote. Somebody already mentioned this. I measure the progress of a society by the degree of progress which women have achieved. He recommended education, family planning, participation in political and social struggles side by side with men, etc., as the strategies for the emancipation of women. As the first law minister in Nehru's cabinet, he drafted and moved the Hindu Code Bill to reform traditional Hindu law by banning polygamy. Until then, there was polygamy in Hindus, and there was no restriction on the number of wives also. Introducing the concept of divorce and giving women property rights. The Hindu Code Bill could not be passed due to the vigorous opposition from Orthodox Hindu elements, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar resigned from the cabinet on this score in September 1951. But Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru succeeded in passing the Hindu Code later as 4 separate laws, even when Baba Saheb Ambedkar was alive. Third, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar encouraged the OBC leaders to form an All India Backward Class Federation on 26 January 1950, the very day the Constitution of India came into force. In his resignation letter from the cabinet, addressed to Prime Minister Nehru, Baba Saheb said, "I will now refer to another matter that had made me dissatisfied with the government. It relates to the treatment accorded to the backward classes. I was very sorry that the Constitution did not embody any safeguards for the backward classes. It was left to be done by the executive government based on the recommendation of a commission to be appointed by the President. More than a year has elapsed since we passed the Constitution, but the government has not even thought of appointing the commission." All this shows that Baba Saheb Ambedkar had very much the interests of OBCs in his heart. So let us stop regarding Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as a leader of the scheduled castes only. He championed the cause of all oppressed people and the downtrodden. I hope that in the future, Ambedkar Jayanti and Ambedkar Remembrance Day will be organized by all employees of the Income Tax Department and not just by the SC and ST Association. Thank you.
உன் கடவுளை விட, உன் சாஸ்திரத்தை விட, உன் முன்னோரை விட, உன் வெங்காயம் விளக்கமாத்தை விட உன் அறிவு பெருசு, அதை சிந்தி.